Hi, I'm Monique Fischer, and I'm the Senior Photograph Conservator at NEDCC.
What type of photographic materials are on glass, and how do you generally treat and then house those photographs?
Well, most commonly you can find two types of photographs on glass. And the first one would be a collodion glass plate. The second one is a gelatin dry plate negative. You can also, sometimes a collodion glass plate can be an amber type, but primarily I'm gonna discuss two different types of negatives, the collodion wet plate negative and the gelatin dry plate negative. One of the types of glass plate negatives you'll find is, as I said, a collodion wet plate. The inventor was Frederick Scott Archer, early 1850s. A wet collodion glass plate is kind of a form of cellulose nitrate dissolved in alcohol and ether, and it's called a wet plate because it needs to be processed before it dries. Otherwise, it just becomes impermeable, and all the photochemicals cannot penetrate. And this was kind of the standard plate until the gelatin dry plate came into existence. So the second half of the 19th century you'll come across these collodion glass plates. But the use of a wet collodion plate was cumbersome. You would have to bring your darkroom around with you to process these plates. And so then you have kind of a transition where you have a number of experimental materials, but what comes out of it is the gelatin dry plate negative. Richard Leach Maddox was the first to successfully make a gelatin dry plate negative in 1871, and you'll see differences between the two different types of plates. With collodion plates, you kind of have a brownish color to it, whereas a gelatin dry plate is kind of gray or black in tone. And really the gelatin dry plate was a great technical achievement at the time. You had exposures less than a second, and they were ready to use. They were ready to use light sensitive plates. You could go off into the field, photograph, bring them back, keep them in the dark, bring them back to you, and then process them in your darkroom at home. So what are the basic differences between a glass plate and a collodion glass plate and a gelatin dry plate? Well, with the collodion plate, they are generally varnished. They tend to be more stable. They have a longer density range, and they're handmade. So when you take a look at them, you'll see that the glass is not cut straight. There's usually little jagged edges, and the emulsion also doesn't cover the plate entirely. As with the gelatin dry plates, you can see that they are rarely varnished. They do tend to fade. There's less density range in these glass plates, and they're machine made, they're not handmade. So again, when you look at the edges of the glass, they're clean cut. Those are kind of the basic differences. So, we get a lot of questions. I have this huge glass plate collection. What do I do with them? And this is something, if you have a crew or assistants that are very handy, you can easily buy 4-flap enclosures. They all have them standard sizes to photographic negatives at different archival vendors. And you can put them in the 4-flap enclosures. Make sure that the emulsion side is down. We use 4-flap enclosures instead of envelopes because the 4-flap enclosures, when you pull them out of the box, you're forced to put them on a table to open them up. If you take an envelope and you have the negative in there and you keep pulling it out, you run the risk of dropping or breaking the glass plate negative. And most glass, if it's not broken or if the emulsion's not flaking, once you have it in the 4-flap enclosure, you can put it into the archival flip top box, and glass you're supposed to store vertically. And once you have all these negatives in a box, and you could have 10, 20 in a box, it's probably important to put a label that says caution, heavy glass, because the person coming in behind you will probably think it's a box of documents and not realize how heavy it is. So these are, small little steps you can do to preserve your photographs on glass.